Welcome everyone to this online event of the impact of cash transfers on child development. I'm Jurian, Communications Manager for 100 Weeks, and I'm your online host today. This is in fact the first time that we are discussing the results of a research that has been done to the impacts of a direct cash program on the development of children and on the brain development of children. Unfortunately, I cannot see all of you, but I know that 400 to 500 people have registered today. So I'm envisioning a very big crowd of me today. And I'm looking forward to the coming hour with you, which will be very interesting. And it will be very interesting because together with you and together with our guest speakers today, we are going to discover the results of a big research that has been done by 3 universities into the development of a cash transfer program like the one of 100 Weeks on the development of children. I hope you can all see my presentation. I'm now going to show you the program for today. I'm going to start to give you a little bit more information about 100 Weeks. What is 100 Weeks and what do we do? After that, I'm going to introduce our guest speakers for today. Professor Kaya Jasinski and cash expert Paul Quarles van Uffert. After that, Kaya is going to present the results of this research to all of you. And after that, the final part of the program will be a discussion with Paul about what does this actually mean for the development world and for the world of cash. But before I continue, I want you to understand that you can all ask questions, and I would really love to get all of your questions. We do a live event via YouTube and via LinkedIn, and for both of these live events, on the right side you have a comment section. For YouTube, to be able to do the live chat, you have to be logged in via your Google account. For LinkedIn, you can just use your LinkedIn account, and on the right side of the live event, there is a comment section where you can ask your questions to me or to Kaya or to Paul. So please ask your questions because we are very curious, and I left some space during this event for all of your questions to be asked. Before we continue to the first guest speaker, I want to introduce to you a little bit more about 100 Weeks, because what do we do as 100 Weeks and why is 100 Weeks part of this research today? 100 Weeks supports families in poverty by giving weekly cash and training so they can move out of poverty on their own terms and conditions, because we believe that people in poverty know best how to get out of that poverty. The full program consists of a normal full program of 100 Weeks consists of 100 weekly unconditional cash transfers, 100 trainings given by local coaches, and 100 savings groups. In short, the result of the work that we have been doing for 10 years now is that since last summer, 10,000 women are part of our program, which means that 60,000 people are reached, including the families of these women. Of these 60,000 people, 78% stays out of poverty up to 1 year after the program, which means that at this moment, 46,000 people got out of poverty through the 100 Weeks program. But as 100 Weeks, we want to do more and we want to know more, not only for ourselves, how to improve our program, but also for the whole world of development and the whole world of cash. We want to see the impact of the program like 100 Weeks, but a general cash program beyond just poverty. And that is why we like to work together with universities, with other research institutions to find out what is the impact of a cash transfer program beyond poverty. And today is a perfect example of that. That is why we are here. We are here to discuss the proven impacts of a cash transfer program like 100 Weeks, but also we want to see how we can move forward together, because that's the final goal of today. Is that we want to find cooperations with other NGOs, with funds, with other people who are interested to move cash programs as a whole forward in the development world. Well, I can tell you a lot more about 100 weeks, and I will share more information about 100 weeks afterwards with all of you. But today it is time to talk about the research at hand. And that is why I want to introduce our first guest speaker, which is Paul Quals van Uffert. Paul is regional advisor for social policy for UNICEF, already for 20 years, if I'm not incorrect, Paul, working for UNICEF in countries like Senegal, Zambia, and Vietnam. And as I like to call you, Paul, you are Mr. Cash. Anything to add to this introduction?
No, thank you so much, Rian, and really, such a pleasure to be here in this session, and thanks for the invitation. And yes, I'm a big supporter of social protection, more broadly, as we call it, and of cash programs in particular.
And if I might ask, what role has cash played in your work and maybe in your life even?
Yeah, so I have had the privilege of working for UNICEF for a while now, and in the area of social protection. And basically, what we do is that we support governments to develop and strengthen their social protection system, which is everything from social insurance to cash programs. And we have placed, in particular in Africa, a large priority on national cash transfer programs. We have done a lot of research. That's why we are very interested also to follow the initiatives of 100 Weeks, where you have always accompanied your work with gathering the evidence and learning, which is fantastic. And I have seen that cash transfers have a broad range of positive impacts on the lives of people and the communities they live in. And that's why I'm such a big supporter. And without mentioning specific impacts, I feel that cash transfers can help vulnerable groups or people who live in poverty to live their lives with indignity. And dignity is a key feature of cash transfer programs for me.
Thank you, Paul. And what are you looking most forward today?
Well, first of all, I look forward to learning from a really exciting piece of research. I think it's quite unique in terms of the outcomes that were looked into. And then I hope we can have a good discussion on that. What does it mean? What are the implications for 100 weeks, but also for organizations such as UNICEF or governments we work with?
And we're going to have that discussion, Paul, after the presentation of Kaya. And that brings me to the other guest speaker of today, which is Kaya Jasinska. Kaya Jasinska is Associate Professor of Applied Psychology and Human Development at the University of Toronto. And together with a team of researchers, she was one of the leading researchers of the research that we are talking about today. And I think, Kaya, the first time that we met with 100 Weeks is 7 years ago now, in 2018. And look where we are right now, Kaya. We are presenting the results of the first research that we did together. A first question that I want to ask you is, why was this research for you so important to do?
Yeah, thanks, Yurian, and thanks for having me and hosting this event and bringing Paul into the conversation. I'm really excited to be here and share this work. First and foremost, I think we know poverty has really large and broad and persistent effects on children and families. And these effects really follow kids right through development and into adulthood. So anything we do to reduce poverty would presumably really help to support healthy, thriving children. The other reason why this is so important to do is the evidence element, the scientific evidence piece here. A randomized controlled trial is really a gold standard of scientific evidence. And so if we really understand how cash transfers and poverty reduction programs work, do they work, for whom they work, and so forth, this is actionable evidence for policymakers, for NGOs, for a variety of stakeholders. And our goal as scientists is to really put forth that evidence so that policies can be evidence-based and most impactful for everyone.
Thank you so much. I already heard the word RCT. I think it's time for you to present the research that you did. So I give the floor to you, Kaya. I'm looking forward to your presentation.
That's great. Let me just make sure I've got the right screen sharing here. Okay, wonderful. So I'm gonna share with you all a little bit about the impacts of the poverty reduction program on brain development, learning, and on families. So our work took place in Cote d'Ivoire. Cote d'Ivoire's got really low learning outcomes and a really high rate of poverty, ranks about 159th on the Human Development Index. And all of this is compounded by really high rates of child labor in the cocoa agricultural sector. Cote d'Ivoire is the world's biggest producer of cocoa. So in this context is where we launched our study called SEME, Supporting Children at Home and at School. And this is actually both an economic and an educational intervention. So we're both reducing poverty in partnership with 100 Weeks Unconditional Cash Transfer, but we're also working simultaneously with the Ministry of Education to improve the quality of education that children are receiving in the school. And the idea here being that we really want to tackle these two issues in tandem. The work is the product really of a lot of people. You see my colleagues listed here. Fabrice Tano, who's a professor at the University of Corogo, Sharon Wolf, who's a professor at the University of Pennsylvania, Samuel Campbell, who's now at the Jacobs Foundation, and Amy Ogan at Carnegie Mellon University. And together we are the ones who did this work together. I'm going to share with you what we found and how cash transfers impact both economic and maternal well-being, child brain development, and learning outcomes as well. This was a community cross-randomized controlled trial, an RCT design. It's about 140 communities participating, about 15 families, 15 women per community. And communities were randomized to either receive cash or be in a control group where they weren't benefiting from the cash transfers. This amounts to about 2,000 families with mom and dad and children under the age of 15 included. Moms received €8 per week for 100 weeks. And I'll just note that all moms participated in a Village Savings and Loan Association, or VSLA. So women are meeting in these weekly groups and saving. And so women in both the control group and in the cash group are participating in the VSLAs. The cash group is getting the cash on top of that. And this is one of the groups that we visited during their VSLA meetings in the region. We're mostly working in central Cote d'Ivoire, in the western part of Cote d'Ivoire. This is a large cocoa growing belt and production zone. And I already mentioned that this was a two-pronged intervention. So we've got both a cash transfer and an education quality element going on. So communities were randomized to either the control group, cash transfer, so they're benefiting from the cash, communities that are getting an improved school program, and a group who are benefiting from both. For our purposes today, I'm going to talk about the two cash transfer groups in comparison to the two non-cash transfer groups. We collected a wide range of measures from mom and child, measuring things like poverty, food insecurity, mental health, and so forth, children's brain development, language, social emotional skills, learning, and labor. And Urian already told you that we actually really started this whole conversation to get going a while ago. It's been 7 years. The cash transfer ran from 2021 to 2023. And during that time, we got baseline assessments, so all our measures prior to the implementation of the cash transfer, midline assessment a year in, an endline assessment, and then even a year after that, a follow-up. And I'm going to really focus on the midline and the endline assessment results with you today. So we're going to talk through what we found on economic and maternal well-being, brain development in kids, and kids learning and labor, and where that takes us in terms of next steps. So starting off with mom, we have really nice positive effects of the cash transfers of multiple elements for mom. Economic well-being improves, food security and consumption improves, and maternal mental health really improved. But we didn't actually find any impacts on parenting investment. So I'm going to walk you through some of this in more detail. You could see here, so these are the moms in the cash group, the impact on them relative to the moms in the control group. And you could see at both our midline and endline measure, we're seeing improvements in savings, increase in assets, reductions in multidimensional poverty. We're also finding that fewer moms who receive the cash transfers are severely food insecure at the end of the intervention, and many more are now food secure relative to the control group. We're also finding that moms are reporting a wider variety of foods consumed. What's particularly great to see is the increase in proteins that are being consumed, so increase in meat, fish, and dairy, and so forth, that moms in the cash transfer group are seeing relative to the control group. And we're also seeing really large reductions in maternal stress, depression, and anxiety symptoms. And this is so important because poverty really undermines mental health, and maternal mental health is one of the most important, if not the most important factor that predicts children's outcomes. It's really hard when mom is depressed, anxious, and stressed to really maintain the kind of responsive quality caregiving that's so important for kids' development. So these are all some of the positive benefits that we're seeing for the cash transfer group. But we're also not seeing any impacts on educational engagement. So that was one of the things that we looked at, and there weren't any impacts. It's important to know that these are unconditional cash transfers, so there's no condition that mom has to enroll her child in school or has to invest in education in any particular way. She's free to spend the money however she sees fit, but we did not 2 years after see any impacts there. Moving on to cash transfers and children's brain development, you might be wondering how we went about measuring this. How do you do a neuroimaging study in rural communities in Cote d'Ivoire? Well, we have a system called functional near-infrared spectroscopy, or FNIRS for short. And this really works a lot like an fMRI, if you're familiar with an fMRI, except that it uses light instead of magnets to do so. And it's portable and has been easy for us to set up in the country. So here's what that looks like. We typically visit a community site like a school and start building our lab, which is really a tent. And then we've got our researchers ready to go there and our happy participant. You'll see on the left, that's actually Dr. Fabrice Tano, who's now, at the time he was a graduate student, he's now a professor in the University of Korogo, and Sosten Gayi, who's a research assistant, this is I think in many years ago, and who's now doing a PhD at Northwestern University in the US. I'll give you a sense of how this looks when we set this up. I did a time-lapse video. At some point, you notice the kids realize there's a camera going, and they get really excited. And you could see me running around in the pink T-shirt there, just bringing all our materials, plugging things in, and getting a lab set up. This has been really important to do because these tools of cognitive neuroscience really do inform our understanding of brain development, and we really wanted to make sure that we were implementing these in a broader range of contexts as well. And so using these technologies, we were able to scan about 400 kids from the 2,000 families who were participating in the cash transfers. So it's a subset, but this is a very large number for a neuroimaging study. Neuroscientists don't typically have such samples. So I'll tell you about some of the things that we found. First, I wanted to talk a little bit about neural network organization. So we were really interested to see whether the cash transfers and how poverty and reductions in poverty might be related to how the brain processes information. So more broadly, we know that the brain is a really complex system, and lots of information has to be processed efficiently in order to do all the complex things that we do. So we borrow from a branch of mathematics called graph theory to really compute some properties about the efficiency of information processing and network organization more broadly. Just to give you a sense of what this might mean. So imagine that every part of the brain is talking to every other part of the brain, and information flow is happening throughout the entire system in a really connected way. Sure, that would be great, but it'd be metabolically pretty expensive to maintain such a brain where everything had to constantly talk to everything else. On the other hand, if regions of the brain aren't well connected, then information isn't going to flow very efficiently through the system. So there's an ideal balance in between the two, where there are some kind of densely connected hubs that connect to other densely connected hubs, and so forth. And there's a bunch of metrics that we capture from graph theory that give us some insight into network organization. And what we found was that at the onset of the study, some of the moms from those 2,000 moms were pregnant. And so we looked at the outcomes for their infants and toddlers 2 years later when we came back at the end of the cash transfers. It turned out that those moms who reported higher levels of poverty at the onset of the study their infants and toddlers show decreased brain network efficiency 2 years later. The good news is that broadly across the whole sample, those moms who are benefiting from the cash transfer, their children seem to show greater network efficiency overall. So the cash transfer is impacting brain network efficiency. But what's also really exciting for us to see is that that impact was actually greatest for the children who are most vulnerable in the sample. So kids whose moms had the lower education levels, those kids tended to benefit more, and we saw more of an impact on network organization in this group. Why this is really important is because a lot of the time we have an intervention, we have a program that works, but it tends to work really well for those who are already the best off in the group, leaving behind those who are the most vulnerable. What we're seeing here is actually the opposite. The most vulnerable kids in the sample are the ones who derive the biggest benefit from the cash transfer program. We also compute, I mentioned this sort of balance between network organization. We call this something small, we call this small worldness. So this is the idea that we've got these dense hubs that are connected to each other. And then we have this metric called small worldness that captures that. What we find is actually cash transfers reduced small worldness, which might be actually an indicator of protracted maturation. Now, there is a large body of neuroscientific evidence that has established that poverty and its correlates like stress tend to actually accelerate brain maturation, and not in a good way. So what happens is if you are growing up in conditions of adversity, the brain tends to develop faster. The idea being that, the world is not safe. I better hurry up and grow up and get out of this plastic and vulnerable time and development where all of these effects all of these environmental factors are having an influence on my brain, and get to a stable place. And this has been widely reported in the literature that we see this accelerated brain maturation in kids who grow up in poverty. What we're seeing here is potentially a reduction in that acceleration as a function of the cash, which is really exciting for us to see as well. We looked at many other elements in terms of the brain function, not all that I'm going to report with you today. One important element we looked at is executive functions. And the prefrontal cortex, the very front part of your brain, is really important in skills like being able to plan, control your impulses, maintain information, manipulate information in real time, and so forth. This skill, which is broadly characterized as executive functions, tend to be hugely predictive of literacy and numeracy outcomes and your overall outcomes in school. So we set up a task where we showed children a bunch of pictures to see, and every time they saw a picture, they had to press a button, and they're just, characters from a movie. Just keep pressing the button every time you see a picture, except when you see the donkey. And of course, once you get going and wanting to press the button and you see the donkey, you've got this prepotent response where you really want to press the button, but you've got to control that impulse and hold off and not press the button. So we looked at brain activity while kids were doing this particular task, this impulse control task. And we found that kids whose moms received the cash transfers, those kids showed more brain activity in the prefrontal cortex during that task, which is very exciting. We also looked at elements of numerical processing as well. So this is, we're cognitive neuroscientists. We design these kind of clever experiments that kids see on a monitor while they're being scanned to really get precision on a particular process that we're interested in capturing. And the idea here is that kids just had to look at different quantities, either dots or numbers and so forth, and they just had to decide with a button press whether the quantity on the left or the quantity on the right was larger. And while they're doing this numerical processing task, it turns out that that same part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, is showing greater brain activity for this numerical processing task for children whose moms received the cash transfers relative to the control group. So another piece of information here is that impact is actually greatest for kids whose math skills at the beginning of the study were lowest. So at the onset, we measured every child's math skills, and it turned out that those who came into the study with the lower math scores showed more of an effect. So similar to the result I shared previously, again, we're seeing that this seems to benefit the kids who are most vulnerable in the sample already, rather than benefiting those that are already doing well. So these impacts are really exciting for us to see. For one, there's been several randomized controlled trials of cash transfers in the literature. They mostly tend to focus on moms and household and family outcomes, sometimes on children's learning, but almost never on brain development. There's only one other study in the US that's currently underway that's incorporating these kind of neuroscientific measures as well. So what about the impacts of cash transfers on learning and labor? What we find is that, well, first, just to acknowledge that schooling and labor and learning are really intricately linked, and participation in child labor tends to disrupt attendance in school and undermines learning gains. What we found is actually really modest, very small impacts on learning and labor. The cash transfers tended to improve schooling enrollment for some of the older children. They seemed to improve literacy outcomes for the older children and marginally reduced agricultural labor. But these effects were small, only for the older children, and they did not remain significant when we controlled for multiple comparisons. So what that means is they didn't really meet our scientific threshold for an impact, which is disappointing given the positive effects we saw on brain. Why for older children? Well, they tend to be ones that are enrolled and have higher learning outcomes and participate in labor. So that might be why they're the ones where we're seeing some of the impacts. But it does appear like the impacts of cash on maternal stress, mental health, and economic well-being that we saw earlier don't seem to extend to children's outcomes as well. And particularly disappointing is that, we did not, with our 2 weeks of cash transfers, completely eradicate child labor or have big impacts of child labor. Child labor is a really complex problem, and it's a systemic issue. There's a whole constellation of legislative and policy tools aimed at reducing child labor, and they have really variable outcomes. Things like bans on child labor tend not to work very well if ultimately the underlying reasons why children are working aren't addressed. Campaigns to inform communities about the harms of child labor, again, may not be as beneficial if ultimately the reason why kids are working in the first place isn't addressed. There is some recent positive evidence suggesting that schooling, and particularly quality education, tends to be protective for kids involved in child labor, including some evidence that we have contributed over the last few years. So the fact that we're seeing some improvements in schooling participation might be a positive indicator in this direction. But it seems like we still have a ways to go. So what's next for this? Well, we have some key insights and some important next steps. We do see that cash transfers are reducing poverty and improving maternal mental health, which is so important. For us, the next step is to really understand whether these effects last 2, 3, 4, 5 years later. Are moms still reporting these types of effects, or do they persist? We see that cash transfers really increase the efficiency of brain network organization and brain activity during cognitive and learning tasks. And for us, the next step is to look at what that looks like over time as the brain changes when we repeatedly scan children over development. And then this last piece, that we're not really seeing big impacts or significant impacts of cash transfers on learning outcomes and child labor, and we only see things for the older kids. But it might be, we're very interested to see whether some of those brain impacts might precede learning. There's a lot, really abundant evidence in developmental psychology and neuroscience that changes at the brain level precede observable changes in learning and skill development. And maybe we might see some impacts on learning over time as those gains take place. It takes time to learn also, so might be part of the reason why we're not seeing those yet. So a lot of important next directions. And with that, I just want to thank you for your time and just highlight the whole team effort that went behind this work, both in Cote d'Ivoire and in our labs in North America, both my lab, the Bold Lab at the University of Toronto, Sharon Wolf's lab at UPenn, and Amy Ogan's lab at Carnegie Mellon University. And a series of funders, the Child Learning and Education Facility in Cote d'Ivoire, funded by UBS and the Jacobs Foundation, Tony Chocoloni Foundation, and Sukden both contributed to this work as well. And we had a number of partners, chiefly 100 Weeks, who helped realize this vision. So thank you so much.
Yes, well, Kaya, I think if you would have been physically somewhere, you will get a very big applause from the crowd now. So I will, I will do it myself.
I appreciate
Thank you
that.
very much
Thank you.
for this presentation, and I just want to take a moment to be proud of this research in general. I think it was a very big thing to do for your team, and also the things that you showed about how this works in the field. It was a very big effort from your team, and I want to thank you for that. And I think we can be very proud of the results. And there were a lot of lot of results, and I can understand a lot of people think like, whoa, this was a lot of very positive results. And I want to zoom in on a few of those with you, Kaya. And before we go to the questions of the people, there's already a question in the screen, but we will tackle them a little bit later. But I will come to your question, Jeroen. The first question from my side is, what results did you, as a researcher, did make you think like, wow, this is something great for you as a researcher?
Well, two things come to mind. So I am a neuroscientist by, originally, and that's by choice. So impacts on brain, I'm biased, are really exciting to me. I think a lot of the time we're trying to capture things about children's learning and outcomes in what I would maybe think is a little bit more of a crude way with our behavioral assessments. They don't quite give us full insight into what's going on under the hood and the mechanism by which an intervention may or may not work. So being able to look at the brain is a really exciting element of unpacking that more closely. I wasn't sure whether we would see anything, to be honest. Again, it's the first time we've done a study like this. We were running this study concurrently with some work coming out of New York that's also looking at the impacts of a universal basic income program on moms and children, including they have some brain development measures as well. So at the time that we launched the study, there was really absolutely nothing in the literature on this. What we do know is there is a lot of evidence about the impact of poverty on brain development, mostly correlational studies, right? So comparing kids raised in poverty versus those who had more affluent or more affluent contexts, and what the impacts are on brain over time, but nothing that's done the reverse, that's actually causally sought to reduce poverty and see whether that can mitigate any of the negative effects that poverty typically has. So I am biased, but I do think this is really exciting. I'm also really encouraged by the fact that we were able to do this. This is a really hard context in which to do a neuroimaging study. I show you the time lapse and it makes it seem like it was quick and easy, but it's really not. But I do think it's an important element that we should be trying to do. There's no reason why our neuroscientific evidence should remain mostly derived from high income countries in the Western world. We really do need to understand what's going on elsewhere and use the full arsenal of tools we have available to us to bear on the most complex problems in the world, and this is one of them. So that I will stay on the brain point a lot. The other piece that I'm very encouraged by is the reductions to maternal stress and improvement in mental health. This is huge because maternal mental health is so important for parenting. It's really hard to provide children with the kind of responsive quality interactions that they need, that their brains depend on to develop and grow and learn and so forth when you're anxious, when you're depressed, and when your stress levels are high. So that we're reducing this is very exciting. Two, we know that mom doesn't have just one child. She has multiple children in her family for the most part. So any reductions, any improvements to her mental health presumably would be beneficial to a wider group of beneficiaries than just intervening on one child at a time, right? So that's to me is a very exciting direction for thinking.
And was there any part of the results that you thought that you didn't expect? Disappointed is a big word, but you used it before.
Right. I mean, I would have loved to look at my data and find that literacy and numeracy skills completely went up and child labor completely went down. And that didn't happen. Not that, but it would be unrealistic to find that. Lots of interventions, they tend to have small effects. They tend not to solve large and complex problems overnight. They're products of really systemic issues. So the fact that we have any impacts, and even the ones on learning and labor that did not meet the threshold for significance, nonetheless, they're heading in the right direction. So this is really encouraging, and it makes me think that our sense of wanting to intervene on poverty directly is the correct approach. Rather than intervening on just learning or just mental health, if we're ultimately not dealing with the kind of the elephant in the room, that all of these things are negatively affected by poverty and all of the correlates of poverty, then we're probably not going to make really great positive strides forward unless we deal with that problem, right? So everything else, I think any other intervention we have is probably to some extent diluted by the fact that poverty is this persistent thorn in any kind of gain that could be realized.
Well, thank you, Kaya. I also want to move to some questions from the people, because I think all the people that are watching today, all of you, also have a lot of questions that are already asked. And I see here one from Jeroen Gulen. Was there a big difference in the improvements to the brain of younger children versus older children? And is there a critical time period where this cash has the biggest impact?
This is a great question. So we are still.
I'm going to try to keep it a bit short. Sorry, Kaya.
Okay. All right.
Looking at the hour.
Broadly, we did not see this, but I will say that we still have a lot of work to do. This brain data it's a large data set. It's complex. There's a lot more analysis and investigation that needs to take place before we have the full picture. My sense is the impact should be greater for the younger children because their brains are more plastic and malleable to a positive effect, but that remains to be seen. One of the important things to do is actually follow these kids longitudinally and really see at what point in their development did they benefit from the cash transfer, when they were younger, when they were older, and the variation in that. So I don't have a clear answer on this yet. It's just an area of active work in our team.
Yes. Thank you very much, Kaya. And also to come back to what you already said earlier, and that we also need some more research. You already said that yesterday you applied for quite a big grant, as I understand it correctly, to find out the long-term impact of the research that you did in Ivory Coast.
Yes, we did. We put in another grant. I mean, this is what we were constantly writing grants to sustain working and learn these lessons. So we put in a grant just this week to hopefully extend and see what the outcomes are 4 years after the cash transfers ended, and whether any of these effects persisted, and whether some effects might have been sleeper effects and didn't materialize immediately in the end line assessment we did, and whether they might actually reveal themselves over time, which does sometimes happen. So it's really important to actually track this long term as well, and make sure that our evidence is complete and we understand how this bears on longer term outcomes.
Thank you, Kaya. Again, thank you very much for this very interesting presentation. I'm sure there's still a lot of questions. We are also going to share the research report tomorrow with everyone who is watching the event today, and also everyone who has registered. So all the things that Kaya just explained are also part of this research report. I want to move to Paul. Thank you. I think that Paul also has some interesting questions to Kaya. Paul, what is your one singular most important question for Kaya after this presentation?
Yeah, thanks, Jurian. And first of all, thank you, Kaya. No, that was an excellent presentation of an incredibly solid research initiative. And cash transfer interventions in Africa in particular are among the most scrutinized interventions in the whole development intervention world. And there are very few research initiatives, though, that have focused on the types of outcome impact variables that you have identified for this particular piece, the brain development, learning outcomes instead of only attendance. So that makes it very unique. A lot of good questions already came up in the chat. I just have maybe two questions. One was also in the chat, so the difference between the age groups. Did you see any differences in brain development or other outcomes across the age groups, and differences between boys and girls? Did you find any? And maybe a quick observation, because there is a discussion ongoing in the chat also about not finding the school enrollment impact that you'd like to see. Perhaps it can be due to levels being already relatively high, and we typically see across cash transfer impact evaluations always an impact on school enrollment, in particular like the lower secondary level. But we see the biggest impact there where the baseline, the starting point, is very low. And perhaps in that area in Côte d'Ivoire, the level was already a little bit higher, which makes it more difficult to detect that additional impact. Over to you.
Yeah, I completely agree. By design, every community that we selected that was, selected into the study and randomized to receive cash or not cash had a school. Because we were also doing a education intervention. In order for that to work, there had to be a school where that could happen. So we're already, it's a sample that is biased because there is a school there's an access to a school provided to the children to some extent. So their enrollment rates are presumably already higher. I'm also, very interested to see what the persistence or transition into secondary school is. We haven't looked at that because our kids are too young, but a lot in Côte d'Ivoire, primary school enrollment rates are very high, but secondary school enrollment rates are not, or there's a big drop. And so to your point, Paul, that we might see effects, particularly when the baseline is already low, that there might be this effect on secondary schooling that we've just not been able to assess yet because our kids are not at that stage. Yeah. And they are now, but at the time of Endline 2023, they're not, but they're heading there.
Okay.
Thank you, Kaya, and thank you for the question, Paul. I want to move forward to a short discussion with you, Paul, because you have a lot of experience in the development sector, a lot of experience with cash. And the first question to you is, what does this research mean to you?
Okay, thank you. I think it means a lot. I think it not only confirms, and it's always good to have pieces of thorough research confirm the positive evidence we already had, but it adds a couple of pieces. It adds the piece on brain development. It adds the piece on the potential for learning outcomes. And personally, what I picked up from the research, there are a few points. Now, the potential of cash transfers to make a difference across the life cycle of the child, and even an intergenerational impact because of the positive impacts on brain development. And we know that has impacts later on in their life cycle when children go to secondary school or when they prepare to join the labor force, for example. And good that Kaya is maybe maneuvering to do further research on that. The second point, and that is really critical, and that also goes to 100 weeks, to me, the most critical success factor of the intervention that led to the impact we are seeing is a program that provides regular, predictable, and frequent payments of cash transfers over a sustained period. 100 weeks, ideally even longer, because we know how stubborn poverty and vulnerability are. And those predictable payments give people trust. They know what they can count on the next month. And they base their investment decisions on that certainty that money will come. And the decision to contribute to the Village Saving and Loans Association, to put in a little bit more because the next month there will be another $8. These things play, they make a difference, we know that. Another point is we see the evidence with unconditional cash transfers. The debate is always everywhere, but it's very critical to remind everybody that in Africa, we see broadly positive impacts of unconditional programs. And later we can have a discussion why these are so important vis-a-vis conditional cash transfers. And my final point on this question is cash is not a silver bullet. Cash makes a necessary difference, but to optimize the impact of cash transfers, it is good to plug in, to add a few complementary services. 100 Weeks uses the trainings and the participation in the Village Savings and Loans Associations. But we can also think of other interventions like parenting sessions, where also it's not only the mothers, but also the fathers or caregivers who participate. Sessions on feeding practices, or individual sort of asset transfers like tools for a vegetable garden. But the question came up in the chat, these one-off transfers typically are more at risk when they go unaccompanied by the regular transfers.
Yeah, and why do you think that is, according to you?
Well, because we're talking about vulnerable people. People for whom it is every day a struggle to make ends meet, and then to allocate time to participate in a training or go here or there for an activity, that is a choice they need to make between gaining some money, the necessary income for food on the table at the end of the day, and participating in an activity. And cash transfers smoothen consumption and help people participate in these complementary services, and they reduce stress, so the quality of participation is much higher. And we have seen it also sometimes with a one-off payment, something happens and the money needs to go elsewhere, not in the investment sphere, but in covering a sudden event in the family, for example. So the combination of regular transfers with a layer of complementary services is the best guarantee in our experience for success.
Yeah. And I know that there are a lot of people watching today, also people from other NGOs or people from the development world, or maybe even people who are connected to governments. What does this mean for them, this research? What does it mean for them, and what does it mean for the development world as a whole?
Yeah, that's a good question. I thought about that, and maybe two things. So first of all, your program is called 100 Weeks, but the way I think about it, it's 1,000 days. The first 1,000 days in the life of a child are the most critical window of investment, with by far the highest rates of return later in the life of the child, or when the child is an adult at working age. We just know that, and this piece of research now brings again a critical focus on that investment in young children. But when we look at how governments invest, in UNICEF, we recently calculated that public spending, government spending in Africa is more than 15 times as high for children aged 15 than it is for a child aged 1. So this is a piece of research that helps policy dialogues, advocacy to say, government, how can we help you convince and help with suggestions to invest more in that early window for children, including through cash transfer programs. Yeah. So there is a big piece here, and we can form a coalition with international organizations, civil society, to bring this to the table to governments, because the only way we can bring these programs to scale is by having public spending at the national level. I'm convinced about that.
Yes, thank you, Paul. And in light of this, I also think that that Kaya had a question to you. She asked me yesterday whether she can ask her the question and what her role could be as a researcher to be able to perform this. So Kaya, over to you.
Yeah, Paul, just reflecting on what you've said too. I think of my role as a role of service as a scientist. That's what we do. My host to conduct the experiments, interpret this data, and report on the evidence and share that as broadly as possible. And often the questions I choose to pursue and the research agenda I have is really shaped by the scientific literature I'm engaging with and the things I think are particularly important. But a kind of way I think many of us are wanting to pivot is to really make sure that the work we do is really responsive to the pressing questions that people in your space have. So my question for you is what would you love for us to be doing next? What are the particular, like hanging things that you're just, we don't have enough evidence on this piece, we just don't know how it's working yet or not, that you think are the really pressing areas for researchers like myself to be engaging with, so that again we're making policy decisions that are based on the right set of evidence.
Yeah. Okay. To me, no, if I see governments in Africa, the single most important question on a politician's mind is jobs for young people.
Mm-hmm.
So we can say, look, for employability, for the economy, let's invest in children and let's invest comprehensively. So not only in cash transfers, but also in education, health, to make sure we get a productive, healthy, and active workforce, so that you can create, or at least one side of the question of jobs and employability. Another area of research which has been very powerful in the discussions with government is the impact on the local economy. There have been some estimates that if we invest $1 in a cash transfer program, through the ripple effects it has, because people, they spend the money mostly locally, the ripple effects on the local economy are very powerful. $1 easily generates another at least half to a second dollar in the local economy, and people listen to that. Yes. When you start with that, you have the ears and eyes, and then you can come in with all the other arguments.
Yeah,
we're going to share information in November about a report that's been done about 100 weeks, and exactly this was researched actually. And for us, it means that $1 becomes $3 in our case, $3 to $4, and we're going to share these results in November, also with everyone here. So it's good that you say it, Paul.
It's important.
I want to move to.
I just want to stress one thing, that is the importance of longer term investments, and to measure, Kaya, also the effect on next generation, follow families over time. These are really worthwhile research investments. And there was one contribution in the chat that maybe if you have longer than 2 years of cash transfer programs, people will not be eager to change. I think all the evidence we have points to the contrary. If you have shorter programs, people tend to lose what they accumulated, in certain settings, especially in fragile settings. So the longer we invest, and it is totally affordable, we can do another webinar on that. The longer we invest, the better we provide the likelihood of people more sustainably, moving towards or above a certain living standard threshold.
Yeah, you'll get no argument from me about the importance of following the evidence for a longer window of time. I think so much, particularly in the development space, interventions are short. They're like a year, 2 years, baseline, end line, that's it. And we're going to base a policy decision on that without really understanding what the long-term impacts of that are or are not. And I think we're accumulating too many of these short time scale studies and evidence based on really narrow windows. Children's development and learning unravels over 2 decades, really. But we're going to sample, just this little nugget of it, and then base a whole decision around it. I think it is a little short-sighted, and I love this call for longer studies and following things intergenerationally. So thanks for sharing that.
Okay.
Thanks, Paul and Kaya. I love these discussions. I think we could continue for hours to talk about all these issues. But we also are on a time schedule, unfortunately. And I also want to give some time for questions from the people who are watching and engaging in this event. And whether there's any question maybe for Paul or for 100 weeks or for... I see a question to Paul. How do you see from René Heeskens, how do you see the relationship between development projects, limited in scope and time, and social security?
Yeah, a very critical question. I have what I said earlier. To me, a social security, then we talk about a country's social protection system, and with all the programs from health insurance to cash transfers, that is the only pathway to having such programs at scale. So that is where we need to be with our evidence and our experience and our bottom-up relations. So the role of development projects such as 100 weeks, beyond what they mean for people in the areas such as in Côte d'Ivoire, the cacao regions, they can provide the evidence, and they can help us be part of a coalition to talk about what we have seen and experienced, not only with central level governments, but also with communities and local governments, so that we create some momentum to pick up the evidence and have decision makers decide to invest more in such programs that will reach more people. And I see programs such as 100 Weeks with a very critical role, especially in terms of learning and evidence sharing, and bringing up the voices of those who have participated in such projects.
Thank you, Paul. Unfortunately, I think we have to leave it to that one question for now, but I have seen that there are a lot of questions, and I would like, we are going to save all of them, but I would also like you to, if you want to know more about the program or about the research, or to Paul, contact us on info@100weeks.org, and we definitely want to get in touch with you. We are drawing close to an end, so I think it is good to talk a little bit more about the next steps. The first and most important next step is that tomorrow we will share the research report with all of you here present, but also everyone who registered for the event, and we will also share it via our socials. But if you want to receive it via your email, then you can scan the little QR code that is now on the left top of the screen with get the report, or you can follow the link that is should be now in the chat on both LinkedIn and YouTube, and then we will share the research report with you tomorrow, and you will also get invited for our next event that's already coming up in January, about the results of a very interesting RCT research we did together with Tilburg University, about the program that we are doing, or that we did in a refugee settlement in Uganda. So Paul already said that sometimes we tweak a little bit and we look for different kind of programs in different contexts, and this is the case for this program. So also very interesting to join that program, and we might invite you again, Paul, for this event as well, because I really like discussions that we have. Well, today showed that cash supports the development of mothers and children. I am very, very thrilled about all the discussions that we had. I'm very interested about everything that we heard, and I'm looking forward to everything that we can still do together, because we see that unconditional cash works. And now it is time for us together, with the funds that are here today, together with the NGOs that are here, but all the other actors that are here today, to scale cash programs like 100 Weeks, but not only 100 Weeks, but cash in general in the development world. So I would say, let's go. But I also want for you to be able to get in touch with us. And that is why I want to give the floor to Gitte. Gitte is the contact person for everything that comes out of this research, but Gitte is also the co-founder of 100 Weeks. The email address of Gitte is already down there, but Gitte, I give the floor to you.
Yeah, thank you, Jurian, and also Paul and Kaya. It was really, for me, a lot of information to digest. And I don't know about you, everybody who's listening and watching, it was a lot of information, but so interesting. I still have that picture in my head of the children with the cap and all those wires. And, I would have loved to be there and to see how that works in practice. So maybe, Kaya, next time I would love to join you in the field. This time it was in Ivory Coast in the cacao sector, but also, of course, we focus on other areas in the world. I don't know about you, everybody, but I am really so motivated because what I've took from it, although I'm still digesting, what I learned is the first 1,000 days of the child are so important. And cash is a proven tool now that we know that we can use to invest in those important days for children. So I am very much motivated, and I'm sure everybody at 100 Weeks is very motivated now to get cash in every household. Let's get cash to those children. So I would like to invite you. Please pass by for a cup of coffee. We are at the Kit in Amsterdam, or drop me an email or give us a call. I would love to talk with you and to explore how we can do this together. So looking forward to be in contact with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gitte. It's 5 o'clock exactly. I think we've never managed to do a meeting in such a structured way that we ended exactly 5. But first of all, I want to thank the guest speakers a lot, Paul and Kaya. Kaya, for extremely interesting research for the last 7 years, by the way, where you did this research for us. Thank you so much, and I think we're going to do a lot more together. Paul, for your very wise experience in development and in cash. It was a pleasure to have you here and to be able to contextualize this research today. But most of all, I want to thank everyone who was watching today. I saw a lot of engagement. I saw a lot of questions. I feel that it's alive and that we are on fire as a cash world. So I join the words of Gitte. Let's go. And I wish you all a very pleasant rest of the day.